So the last thing we need to discuss when talking about variables is something called a constant. Now if you think about the term constant, it means it's something that doesn't change. Well, that doesn't make sense for a variable because a variable by definition is something that changes over time. A constant is a very special type of variable. It's really a variable that is assigned a value in the very beginning when it's created, but that's it. So really the only reason we need it is more of like a nickname. So we don't want certain things like magic numbers kicking around in our programs. And a magic number is when we see numbers inside the middle of our program and they have no meaning behind them. We don't really understand why they're there. So I might see something like this. Maybe I have a variable called int radius. And let's give it a starting value of 5. And maybe I want to calculate the radius of a circle. So I might need another variable. Let's say double. Sorry, not the radius of a circle. I might want like the circumference of a circle. So let's say circumference. Now I don't know the value of circumference in the beginning, so I can't assign it a value. I'm going to calculate that. So I'm going to say circumference assign it the value. So the formula for the circumference of a circle is 2 pi r. So I know it's 2 times 3.14 times radius. Okay. Now the problem is I might run into this, and let's say for example I don't look at that variable is not named very well. It doesn't actually say circumference. It says something like b, which is an awful variable name, but people make mistakes and it does occur. So you might see something like b equals 2 times 3.14 times radius. Well, the problem is you don't really know what those numbers mean. You don't know what they represent. And because of the poor naming that occurred, it doesn't help matters. So what we like to do is we like to come up with nicknames to represent certain values that are constant, that are never going to change. I know for a fact that pi is pi and it's not going to change, just like the acceleration of gravity is always the same value as long as I'm on Earth. So these types of things that don't change, they remain constant. But I want to use a constant instead of using the number because it makes it more readable, it makes it more understandable. So how do we actually create a constant? Well, we create a constant almost the exact same way we create a variable. So let's say, for example, I want to create a constant to store the value pi. So let me just actually get rid of a few things here. Let me get rid of the word constant here. Let's say I want to create my constant for pi. Now normally I would just say something like this. Double pi equals 3.14, and I'd be done. Now the way we actually do it is we just need one more keyword. We just use the keyword const. Const, of course, is short for constant. So we have const double pi equals 3.14. It's exactly the same as creating a regular variable. But by setting that const, I now know that I can never change the value of pi throughout the rest of my program. I can only use it. But the thing is, when I'm programming and I see something like this, 2 times pi times radius, I think that pi is a variable too, because there's nothing to distinguish pi from radius in terms of what it is, just that they're two different things, two variables. So we need some way to separate constants from variables at a glance. So when I'm looking at the code, I know which ones I can change and which ones I can't change. And the way we do that is with our naming conventions. So our naming conventions for variables are very simple in terms of they must be descriptive, they must use camel case, and no numbers to start with, things like that. Well, a constant uses the exact same naming conventions except for 2. So we still can't have spaces, but the way that we do it for a constant is that instead of using camel case, we use the term capital. All of the letters, everything inside of the constant is a capital letter. So for example, if we had a constant for the acceleration of gravity, I might do something like this. Const double acceleration. I'm just going to say accel due to gravity. Oops. And we're going to assign that the value 9.81. Now you notice how I separate each word because I still can't have spaces, and I have everything as being a capital. I have no way of separating the words. The way I do that is this is where I finally use underscores. This is the only place you really should be using them at this point. So all of our constants are going to be completely capitalized, and each word is separated with an underscore. And of course the name should be descriptive. So now my program, when I see it, I see 2 times capital pi times radius. So I know that pi is a constant and it can't be changed. Simple as that. The one thing you need to remember is when you're creating a constant, you must assign it a value when you create it. You can't do it later. It must be set at that time. Now, this works fine for a Windows Form program, but if you remember, when we were doing in the last module, we saw that in a console program, if we wanted to create a variable, we had to do something like this: static int num. And the same thing goes for constants. If we're going to create those constants in the same location, we need to use that keyword static. So it'll be static const, let's say double pi equals 3.14. So you notice exactly the same thing. The static always comes first. Other than that, it's just like a regular variable declaration, excluding the naming conventions. And that is a constant.